March 15, 2003. Carlos Mendoza had been running drugs for Griselda Blanco for 8 years, the woman he called La Madrina. That's exactly why the rival Ochoa cartel paid him $100,000 to set her up. 12 of her most trusted lieutenants gathered in the warehouse that night. Carlos walked to the back room, picked up the phone, and called in Griselda's exact location to her enemies. What happened in the next 40 minutes became Miami's most buried secret. The FBI destroyed evidence because of it. And for 20 years, when people whispered about the cocaine wars, they always came back to this night. The night Carlos made the call. The night Griselda Blanco heard every word through the wire she'd planted on him 6 months earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The static crackle from the surveillance equipment had been Griselda's lullaby for months. She sat in her Coral Gables mansion, headphones pressed against her ears, listening to Carlos breathe into the phone like a man signing his own death warrant. The betrayal didn't surprise her. In this business, loyalty was a luxury few could afford. What surprised her was how sloppy he'd gotten. Target confirmed at Warehouse 7, Carlos whispered into the receiver. All 12 are here. She's wearing the white jacket. Griselda smiled, fingering the red silk blouse she'd chosen specifically for tonight. White jacket. Even his intel was shit. She had 40 minutes before the Ochoa hit squad arrived. 40 minutes to turn Carlos's betrayal into her greatest victory. Miguel, she called to her bodyguard. Bring me the Motorola. The phone felt heavy in her hands, weighted with 20 years of carefully built reputation. One call would save her life. The second call would end Carlos's. But the third call, that one would change everything. She dialed the warehouse. Carlos, mi amor, she purred when he picked up. I need you to do something for me. The silence stretched long enough for her to hear his heart hammering through the wire. Si, madrina, whatever you need. I want you to gather everyone in the main room. Tell them we're moving the operation tonight. Emergency protocol. But no questions, Carlos. Just do it. She hung up and immediately dialed again. This time, the voice that answered was crisp, professional, American. Agent Rivera. Marcus, she said, letting her accent thicken just enough to remind him who held the cards. Your little DEA operation at the port tonight? Cancel it. Griselda. His voice carried 20 years of frustration. You know I can't. You can, and you will, because in 30 minutes the Ochoa cartel is going to hit my warehouse. 12 of my people are about to die, including one of your confidential informants. The pause told her everything. Rivera had someone inside her organization, just as she'd suspected. What do you want? He asked. Nothing tonight, but you'll owe me. And Marcus? She traced the rim of her wine glass with one finger. When I come to collect, you'll pay. She severed the connection and made the third call. This one went to Miguel Ochoa himself. Miguel, you beautiful bastard, she laughed when he answered. Did you really think Carlos Mendoza was smart enough to play both sides? The warehouse sat like a concrete tomb under Miami's humid night sky. Inside, Carlos paced the main floor while Griselda's lieutenants checked their weapons and counted money with the mechanical precision of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. They trusted him. After 8 years of running product, taking bullets, and keeping his mouth shut, they trusted him completely. That trust was about to get them all killed. At 11:47 p.m., the Ochoa vehicles pulled into the industrial park. Carlos watched through the grimy window as 6 men in tactical gear moved toward the building with military precision. His mouth tasted like copper and betrayal. The first breach charge blew the north entrance off its hinges. The second took out the loading dock. By the time the shooting started, Carlos was already running toward the back exit, abandoning the men who'd called him brother. He made it exactly 12 feet. The bullet caught him in the spine, dropping him face first onto the oil-stained concrete. Pain exploded through his nervous system as he rolled over, looking up into the face of the woman he'd tried to kill. Griselda Blanco stood over him in her red silk blouse, smoking a cigarette like she was waiting for a bus instead of standing in the middle of a war zone. Behind her, the warehouse erupted in gunfire and screaming. The white jacket, Carlos? She knelt beside him, pressing the cigarette against his cheek until the skin blistered. 8 years, and you still can't tell red from white. No wonder you thought you could outsmart me. Carlos tried to speak, but blood was filling his lungs faster than air. Don't worry, Griselda whispered. I'm not going to kill you. That would be too easy. She stood and nodded to Miguel, who appeared beside her like a shadow. Break his legs, both of them, then dump him somewhere the DEA will find him. As she walked away, Carlos heard her laughing over the sound of automatic weapons fire. The Ochoa hit squad was systematically executing every person in that warehouse, just as planned. But Griselda Blanco was supposed to be among the dead. Instead, she'd turned his betrayal into a masterpiece. The last thing Carlos saw before Miguel's boot connected with his skull was Griselda disappearing into the Miami night, already planning her next move in a game that had no rules and no mercy. In 12 hours, the newspapers would report a cartel massacre. The FBI would classify the case. And Marcus Rivera would realize he'd just made a deal with the devil herself. The call came at 2:17 a.m., jarring Marcus Rivera from the kind of sleep that never really came anymore. The restless half-consciousness of a man who'd learned to keep one ear open for danger. His hand found the phone on the second ring, muscle memory from 23 years of federal service overriding the fog of exhaustion. Rivera, we got bodies, Marcus. Warehouse 7 in the industrial district. 12 dead, 1 barely breathing. Marcus recognized the voice. Detective Ray Santos, Miami PD. They'd worked together before, back when the lines between DEA operations and local homicides blurred like watercolors in the rain. Cartel? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. The sick feeling in his stomach told him exactly which cartel. What's left of them, yeah. But Marcus, the survivor keeps asking for you, by name. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood outside Jackson Memorial's trauma unit, watching through reinforced glass as doctors worked on what remained of Carlos Mendoza. The man's face was a purple mess of swelling and stitches, both legs encased in surgical hardware, but his eyes, those eyes burned with the desperate clarity of someone who'd stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. The ICU smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, a sterile antiseptic that never quite masked the underlying scent of fear and mortality. Marcus had spent too many nights in places like this, watching good agents fight for their lives after operations went sideways. But this felt different. This felt personal. Griselda, Carlos wheezed when Marcus finally got clearance to enter the room. She knew everything. Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed, keeping his voice low. The monitors beeped steadily, measuring out Carlos's remaining time in electronic heartbeats. What happened, Carlos? Talk to me. The phone call. She called you. Carlos's words came in bloody whispers. She knew about the DEA operation. She knew I was... The confession died in a fit of coughing that brought nurses running. As they worked around him, Marcus stared out the window at Miami's pre-dawn darkness, feeling the weight of 2 decades settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Outside, the city sprawled toward the horizon. His city, the place he'd chosen to make his stand after Elena died. The place where he'd tried to build something clean. When the room cleared, Carlos reached out with trembling fingers. She's not done with you, Marcus. This was just the beginning. By 6 a.m., Marcus was sitting in his office above Rodriguez Auto Repair in Little Havana, nursing black coffee and staring at a case file he'd hoped never to open again. Rivera Security Solutions occupied a cramped second-floor space that smelled like motor oil from below and Elena's vanilla candles, the ones he still burned every morning, 5 years after the cancer took her. The photograph of Griselda Blanco stared back at him from the manila folder, a woman in her 40s with cold intelligence behind dark eyes, captured during a rare public appearance in 1998. She'd been untouchable then, insulated by layers of violence and corruption. The Ochoa massacre suggested nothing had changed. Maldita sea, he muttered, reaching for his phone. His first call went to Maria Sandoval, his former DEA partner, who now ran a private investigation firm in Coral Gables. The second went to his daughter Sophia, a prosecutor with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office. Both calls went to voicemail. Both made him feel like he was painting targets on the people he loved most. The morning sun painted Little Havana in shades of amber and nostalgia. From his window, Marcus could see the Cuban Memorial Park where he'd proposed to Elena 32 years ago, back when they were both young enough to believe love could conquer anything. Now the park served as a reminder of what he'd lost. Not just Elena, but the certainty that his choices mattered, that justice meant something. His secure phone buzzed. Unknown number. Rivera. Silence stretched across the connection, filled with the distant sound of Miami traffic. Then, soft as silk and twice as dangerous, Marcus. His blood turned to ice water. Griselda. Did you enjoy your visit to the hospital? Poor Carlos. He was always so eager to please. Her laugh carried 20 years of accumulated cruelty. I hope you got everything you needed from our conversation. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. What do you want? What I've always wanted, querido. To finish what we started. The line went quiet except for the sound of her breathing. Check your mail. The connection died. Marcus found the envelope slipped under his office door. Cream-colored paper, his name written in elegant script. Inside, a single photograph, Elena leaving their house on the morning she died, captured from across the street with telephoto precision. On the back, in the same careful handwriting, some debts take 20 years to collect. His hands shook as he reached for the bourbon he kept in his desk drawer. Outside, little Havana continued its morning routine, oblivious to the fact that the dead had just reached out from the past to remind him that in Griselda Blanco's world, no one ever really escaped. The game was starting again. The bourbon burned going down, but it didn't chase away the ice that had settled in Marcus's chest. He stared at the photograph of Elena, his thumb tracing the edge where someone had captured her final morning with predatory patience. She'd been wearing the blue sundress he'd bought her for their anniversary, the one that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, the one she'd died in. For 5 years, he'd carried the story like a stone in his heart. Elena Rivera, beloved wife of retired DEA agent Marcus Rivera, victim of a random cartel shooting outside Miami General Hospital where she'd been receiving chemotherapy. Wrong place, wrong time. The kind of senseless violence that plagued their city like a fever that never broke. But this photograph, this goddamn photograph, told a different story entirely. Marcus fumbled for his laptop, fingers trembling as he accessed the encrypted files he'd kept from his DEA days. Elena's case file was thin, professionally sanitized. The investigating detective had been thorough but ultimately inconclusive. 3 shots from a passing motorcycle, no witnesses, no leads. Another statistic in Miami's endless war between order and chaos. He'd never questioned it. Why would he? Elena had been a kindergarten teacher, for Christ's sake. She made paper snowflakes and taught 5-year-olds to tie their shoes. The idea that someone would target her specifically had been incomprehensible. The secure phone rang again. Same unknown number. Marcus! Griselda's voice poured through the speaker like poisoned honey. You're looking at the photograph. I can feel it from here. You killed her. The words came out strangled, barely human. I killed a lot of people, querido. You'll need to be more specific. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing Elena's face in those final weeks, pale and thin from the chemo, but still fighting, still believing she had years ahead of them. Elena was innocent. She had nothing to do with any of this. Innocent? Griselda's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Your wife paid the price for your choices, Marcus. Every time you chose your badge over my business, every raid you led, every shipment you seized, it all added up. Compound interest on a debt you never even knew you owed. The room spun around him. Marcus gripped the edge of his desk, anchor points in a world that had suddenly lost all meaning. The night of the warehouse. When I pulled the DEA operation because you warned me about the Ochoa hit. Now you're understanding. I needed you to owe me something, to feel responsible for those 12 lives. It made you compliant. Her voice carried the satisfaction of a chess master revealing checkmate. But that was just practice, Marcus. Elena was the real lesson. Outside his window, little Havana continued its morning rhythm. Mrs. Herrera was hanging laundry on her fire escape. Old Miguel was opening his fruit stand. Children walked to school with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Life, normal and precious, and completely unaware that the foundation of Marcus Rivera's world had just crumbled into dust. You want to know the beautiful part? Griselda continued. You never stopped hunting me. Even after you retired, even after Elena got sick, you kept pulling strings, making calls, trying to find me. The great Marcus Rivera, convinced that justice was just one more raid away. But I was hunting you the whole time. Marcus thought of the nights he'd spent in this office, poring over intelligence reports and financial records, following threads that always seemed to lead nowhere. The obsession that had cost him sleep, peace, and ultimately his wife's final months. He'd been so focused on catching Griselda Blanco that he'd missed her stalking him through the shadows of his own life. 20 years, he whispered. 20 years of watching. 20 years of waiting. Do you know how many times I could have killed you, Marcus? But death would have been mercy. I wanted you to live with the weight of your failures. I wanted you to carry the guilt of every life lost because of your precious moral code. The photograph stared up at him from his desk, Elena in her blue dress, walking toward her death with no idea that her husband's past was about to claim her future. Marcus realized he was crying, hot tears that felt like acid on his cheeks. She loved you until the end, Griselda said, her voice suddenly gentle, almost maternal. Even in those final moments she was worried about you. Tell Marcus I love him, she said. Tell him this wasn't his fault, but we both know that's not true, don't we? The line went dead. Marcus sat in the silence of his office, surrounded by the debris of everything he'd thought he knew about his life. Elena's vanilla candles flickered on the windowsill, casting dancing shadows on the walls like ghosts of all the mornings they'd shared, all the mornings that had been stolen from them. The game wasn't starting again. It had never ended. Marcus sat frozen at his desk for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The photograph of Elena seemed to pulse in his peripheral vision like an open wound. He needed to move, needed to think, needed to do something other than sit here drowning in the wreckage of everything he'd believed about his life. He reached for his phone to call Maria, then stopped. If Griselda had been watching him for 20 years, if she'd killed Elena to make a point, then anyone close to him was already in her crosshairs. The thought made him physically sick. Instead, he locked the photograph in his desk drawer and walked downstairs to Rodriguez Auto Repair. The familiar sounds of pneumatic tools and Spanish radio helped steady his nerves. Miguel Rodriguez looked up from under the hood of a '98 Civic, grease-stained hands holding a timing belt. Marcus, you look like shit. Everything okay up there? Just a difficult client. The lie came easily, 23 years of federal training kicking in. Keep it simple, keep it normal, keep everyone safe. But Miguel's expression shifted, the easy familiarity draining from his face like water through a sieve. Marcus, there was a woman here earlier, before you came down. She was asking questions. The air in the garage suddenly felt thin. What kind of questions? About you, your schedule, when you usually arrive. Miguel wiped his hands on a rag, movements nervous and precise. I told her I don't know nothing about nothing, but she scared me, hermano. The way she looked at my grandson's picture on the workbench. Marcus felt the walls closing in. Griselda wasn't just playing games. She was mapping his world, cataloging everyone who mattered to him. What did she look like? Older woman, maybe 60. Expensive clothes, but her eyes... Miguel shuddered. Cold like a snake. She left this for you. The business card was pristine white with elegant black lettering, Esperanza Consulting. Strategic solutions for complex problems. No address, just a phone number and a name that made Marcus's blood freeze. Y Santos, Esperanza, Hope. Even her aliases carried poison. Miguel, listen to me carefully. If that woman comes back, you've never seen me. You don't know where I live, where I go, nothing. Can you do that? Miguel nodded, but fear had settled into the lines around his eyes. Marcus, what kind of trouble? The kind that kills people for asking questions. Marcus pocketed the card. I'm going to handle this, but I need you to trust me. Can you close early today? Take your family somewhere public? He climbed back to his office, mind racing through options that all led to dead ends. Call the FBI? Griselda had evaded federal prosecution for decades. Call Miami PD? Half the department was rumored to be on cartel payrolls. Run? She'd already proven she could reach him anywhere. The secure phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number, Cafe Luna, 2 p.m. Come alone. Or Mrs. Rodriguez starts losing family members. Marcus stared at the screen, watching his last illusion of control evaporate. Griselda wasn't just ahead of him. She was writing the rules of a game he didn't even understand yet. He pulled up the contact information for Maria Sandoval, his finger hovering over the call button. Maria had been his partner for 8 years, had saved his life twice, knew him better than anyone except Elena. If he was going to face Griselda, he needed backup he could trust. But the phone felt heavy in his hand. What if Maria was already compromised? What if the 20-year game had included turning his own allies against him? The paranoia crept through his thoughts like smoke, making him question every relationship, every memory, every moment of trust he'd ever shared. At 1:45, Marcus walked into Café Luna in the heart of Little Havana. The lunch crowd was thinning out, leaving scattered tables of retirees nursing Cuban coffee and playing dominoes. Normal people living normal lives, oblivious to the predator sitting alone in the corner booth. Griselda Blanco looked nothing like her old photographs. Gone was the hard-edged cartel queen, replaced by an elegant woman in a cream-colored suit who could have been anyone's well-dressed grandmother. But her eyes, those dark, calculating eyes, belonged to the same woman who'd built an empire on violence and fear. Marcus. She gestured to the seat across from her with manicured fingers. You look tired. Grief will do that to a man. He sat down slowly, hyper-aware of every other person in the cafe, every exit, every potential threat. What do you want, Griselda? The same thing I've always wanted. She sipped her café cortado with the casual grace of someone discussing the weather. To watch you suffer. But first, we need to talk about your partner. What partner? Her smile was razor thin. The one who's been feeding me information for 15 years. The one who told me exactly when Elena would be most vulnerable. The world tilted sideways, and Marcus realized the game was far from over. It was just beginning. Cold and heavy and poisonous. The cafe's ambient noise, clinking cups, muted conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, faded to white static as Griselda's words settled into his consciousness like shards of glass. You're lying. But even as he said it, the certainty was already crumbling. 20 years of partnerships, of shared operations, of trusting someone with his life. Someone who knew his routines, Elena's schedule, the soft, vulnerable places where a man could be broken. Griselda tilted her head, studying him with the clinical interest of an entomologist examining a pinned butterfly. Am I? Think about it, Marcus. How did I always seem to be one step ahead? How did my operations slip through DEA nets that should have been foolproof? She reached into her purse and placed a cell phone on the table between them. Would you like to hear the recordings? The phone sat there like a loaded gun. Marcus stared at it, remembering late-night strategy sessions, classified briefings, moments of absolute trust now recontextualized as acts of betrayal. His mind raced through faces. Tommy Reyes, his partner for the last 6 years before retirement. Sarah Chen, who'd worked intelligence. Jim Morrison, who'd been best man at his wedding. The warehouse raid that went sideways in 04, Griselda continued, her voice soft as a confessor's. You pulled your team 30 minutes before my rivals were supposed to hit the Ochoa shipment. 12 people died because you chose to protect an undercover operation instead of stopping a massacre. Do you remember who convinced you to make that call? Marcus did remember. The heated argument in the surveillance van, the voice of reason cutting through his moral outrage, pointing out that blowing their deep cover operation would cost more lives in the long run. The voice he'd trusted above his own instincts. No. The word came out strangled. He wouldn't. He called it asset management. Very clinical, very professional. Griselda's smile was a scalpel. Your partner had a gambling problem, you see. Sports betting, poker games, bad investments. My people are very good at identifying weaknesses. The cafe walls seemed to be closing in. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, his wedding ring clicking against the metal. Elena had loved this place. They'd come here for Sunday breakfast during her chemo treatments, trying to maintain some semblance of normal life while poison dripped into her veins to fight different poison in her blood. Elena's appointment schedule, he whispered, understanding flooding through him like ice water. The timing of her treatments. Someone would have had to know. Tuesdays and Fridays, 10 a.m. at Miami General. She was always early, 15 minutes like clockwork. Such a punctual woman. Griselda's voice carried mock admiration. It took months to establish the pattern. We needed to be sure. Marcus thought of Elena, in her blue dress, walking across the hospital parking lot with the careful steps of someone whose bones felt like spun glass. She'd insisted on driving herself those last few weeks, maintaining independence even as the cancer hollowed her out from within. He'd wanted to go with her, had offered a dozen times, but the Mendoza cartel operation had been heating up and— "You were in the middle of the Mendoza surveillance," Griselda said, reading his face with surgical precision. 80-hour weeks, sleeping in surveillance vans, completely focused on building your case. Someone would have had to cover for you with Elena, wouldn't they? Someone who knew her schedule, her routines, her vulnerability. The memory hit him like a physical blow, coming home exhausted at 2 a.m. to find a note on the kitchen table. "Elena's appointment went well today. She asked about you. Jim Morrison, his partner of 8 years. The man who'd held Marcus together at Elena's funeral, who'd helped him clean out her closets, who'd recommended the grief counselor and checked on him every week for months after the burial. He was there," Marcus said, the words falling out of him like broken teeth. "At her funeral. He gave the eulogy." "Beautiful service," Griselda agreed. "I watched from across the street. Jim was very convincing in his grief. Method acting, you might say." The phone on the table buzzed. A text message preview showed on the screen. "Target eliminated. No complications. Marcus stared at the timestamp. The date Elena died, 11:47 a.m., 37 minutes after her appointment time. "She fought," Griselda said softly, almost gently. "When the motorcycle pulled up beside her car, she tried to run. The first shot only wounded her. She made it almost to the hospital entrance before—" Griselda shrugged delicately. "Your Elena was braver than I expected. Stubborn, like her husband." Something fundamental broke inside Marcus's chest, not his heart, that had shattered 5 years ago in a hospital corridor that smelled like disinfectant and death. This was deeper, older, the foundational belief that some things in his life had been real, had been his, had been untouchable. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Griselda leaned forward, and for the first time, he saw the true predator beneath the grandmother's disguise. "Because I wanted you to understand what it feels like to lose everything, to know that your choices have consequences that echo through decades. To learn that in my world, Marcus, nobody gets to walk away clean." She stood gracefully, leaving money on the table for her coffee. "Jim's waiting for you at the marina, slip 47. He has something that belongs to you." Marcus sat paralyzed at the cafe table, staring at the phone Griselda had left behind. The timestamp on Jim's message burned into his retinas, 11:47 a.m., the exact moment his world had ended, reduced to a casual text between conspirators. The drive to the marina passed in a blur of Miami traffic and fractured memories. Every conversation with Jim over the past 5 years took on a sinister new dimension. The grief counselor recommendation, had that been genuine concern or careful manipulation? The weekly check-ins, friendship or surveillance? The way Jim had insisted on handling Elena's case file personally, keeping Marcus protected from the details during his time of loss. Slip 47 sat at the end of the furthest dock, a modest cabin cruiser named Second Chance. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He found Jim Morrison sitting on the stern, feet dangling in the water like a man without a care in the world. At 55, Jim still looked like the federal agent Marcus had trusted with his life. Square jaw, graying temples, the kind of steady presence that made other cops gravitate toward him in crisis situations. "She told you," Jim said without looking up. It wasn't a question. Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward his service weapon, then stopped. What was the point? The betrayal was complete, absolute. Violence wouldn't rewind the last 20 years or bring Elena back from the dead. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. "Since 98. The Delgado bust that went sideways." Jim finally looked up, and Marcus was shocked to see genuine pain in his partner's eyes. "I lost 40 grand on a sure thing. Heat versus Knicks. Game was supposed to be fixed. Borrowed from the wrong people to cover it." Marcus remembered that case. They'd been so close to taking down the Delgado money laundering operation. Months of surveillance down the drain when their targets vanished 12 hours before the raid. The intelligence leak had never been identified. Griselda's people approached me at Elena's birthday party, Jim continued. Remember? That little restaurant in Coral Gables. You were in the bathroom when her guy sat down at our table, started talking about my gambling debts like he was discussing the weather. The memory surfaced, Elena laughing at something Jim had said, her face flushed with wine and happiness. It had been a good day, one of the last before her diagnosis. Marcus had joked about Jim charming his wife, never imagining that death was already taking inventory at their table. I told myself it would just be small things, Jim said. Operational schedules, general intelligence, nothing that would get anyone killed. But she kept asking for more, and the debts kept growing. And then Elena got sick. Don't Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare use her illness as an excuse. Jim flinched but continued. When Griselda ordered the hit, I tried to talk her out of it. I swear to God, Marcus, I told her Elena was innocent, that there had to be another way. But she said the lesson only worked if it destroyed something irreplaceable. Marcus stepped onto the boat, the gentle rocking motion at odds with the violence in his chest. You held me at her funeral. You gave the fucking eulogy. 'Cause I loved her too. Jim's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down his weathered face. She was like a sister to me. Do you think this was easy? Do you think I don't see her face every night when I close my eyes? Then why didn't you warn her? Why didn't you tell me? Because Griselda had pictures of my daughter. Jim's voice broke completely. Sarah at her college dorm, at her job, walking to her car. She said if I interfered, if I warned you, Sarah would be next. I had to choose between Elena and my own child. The admission hung between them like a cancer. Marcus understood the mathematics of it. One life weighed against another, love measured against love, betrayal justified by desperation. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness. She has something for you, Jim said, reaching into a cooler beside him. He pulled out a small wooden box, the kind Elena used for her jewelry, from the house, from Elena's things. Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was Elena's wedding ring and a folded piece of paper in her handwriting. The note was brief. For my Marcus, if anything happens to me, know that our love was the realest thing in this broken world. Don't let the darkness win. E. She wrote it during her last round of chemo, Jim said quietly. Gave it to me for safekeeping. Said she had a feeling something bad was coming, but not from the cancer. Marcus read the note again, his wife's words cutting through 20 years of manipulation and lies. Elena had known. Somehow, she'd sensed the predator circling their life, and still she'd chosen hope over fear. Griselda thinks she broke you, Jim said. But Elena knew better. Marcus looked up at his former partner, the man who'd killed his wife to save his daughter, and realized the game was about to change again. Marcus clutched Elena's note against his chest, her words burning through him like a brand. The wooden box fell to the boat's deck with a hollow clatter as 20 years of carefully constructed grief began to reshape itself into something harder, more purposeful. Where is she? His voice was barely recognizable, scraped raw by revelation and rage. Jim wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Marcus, you can't. Where is Griselda? She's not the same woman from the old files. She's got protection now, legitimate business fronts, politicians in her pocket. This isn't 1985. You can't just kick down doors and start shooting. Marcus stood slowly, Elena's wedding ring catching the late afternoon sun. He slipped it onto his pinky finger, the only one small enough to hold it, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The broken man who'd stumbled through 5 years of guilt and whiskey was dissolving, replaced by someone Elena would recognize, someone she'd loved before grief had hollowed him out. I need everything, Marcus said. Every contact, every safe house, every piece of intelligence you fed her. All of it. Marcus, listen to me. Jim struggled to his feet, desperation creeping into his voice. This isn't justice. It's suicide. She's been planning this confrontation for 20 years. Every move you make, she's already anticipated. Then I'll make moves she doesn't expect. With what? You're retired DEA running a 2-bit security company. She's got an army of lawyers, politicians, and killers. The moment you surface as a threat, I'm already a threat. Marcus pocketed Elena's note, the paper warm against his palm. Otherwise, she wouldn't have spent 2 decades orchestrating this elaborate revenge fantasy. She's afraid of something. Jim grabbed Marcus's arm as he turned to leave. She's not afraid. She's obsessed. There's a difference. Obsession makes people do things that defy logic, self-preservation, everything rational. Marcus looked down at Jim's hand, then back at his former partner's face. The man who'd betrayed him, the man who'd held him while he sobbed at Elena's graveside. The impossible complexity of it threatened to tear him apart, but Elena's words anchored him. Don't let the darkness win. Maybe, Marcus said, but obsession also creates blind spots. He pulled free and walked toward the gangplank, but Jim's voice stopped him at the edge of the dock. She's not done with you yet, Marcus. This meeting today, it wasn't the end game. It was just another move in a game that's bigger than both of us. What do you mean? Jim reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with photographs and documents. She made me put together a file. Everything about your life now, your security business, your clients, the people you've gotten close to, Maria Sandoval, Miguel Rodriguez, Father Santos from your AA meetings. The names hit Marcus like physical blows. Maria, his former DEA partner who still called every few months to check on him. Miguel, who treated him like family at the garage. Father Santos, who'd helped him find something resembling peace in the aftermath of Elena's death. She's going to use them, Marcus realized. Not just to hurt me, to control the confrontation. She wants you angry but not reckless, motivated but following her script. Jim held out the envelope. She's counting on your protective instincts to drive you exactly where she wants you. Marcus took the file, his mind already racing through tactical possibilities. Griselda had made one critical error. She'd assumed that learning the truth would break him further, would send him spiraling into the same destructive grief that had defined the last 5 years. She hadn't counted on Elena's final message, on the resurrection of the man who'd once been DEA's best hunter. There's something else, Jim said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The original warehouse raid, the one where you chose to protect the undercover operation instead of stopping the massacre. Griselda orchestrated that too. She fed information to the Ochoa rivals, knowing exactly how you'd react when forced to choose between saving lives and preserving a long-term investigation. The revelation should have devastated him. Instead, Marcus felt a cold clarity settling over him like armor. She's been studying me for over 20 years. Every decision, every moral choice, every psychological pressure point. Jim nodded grimly. She turned your own conscience into a weapon against you. Marcus opened the envelope and glanced at the surveillance photos. Maria leaving her apartment, Miguel playing with his grandson, Father Santos locking up the church. Each image was a threat, a promise, a move in Griselda's endgame. But she made one mistake, Marcus said, closing the file with finality. What's that? Marcus touched Elena's ring on his finger, feeling its weight like an anchor to something unbreakable. She assumes I'm still the same man who could be manipulated by guilt and fear. But that man died with Elena 5 years ago. He walked away from the marina as the sun began to set over Miami, Elena's words echoing in his mind like a battle cry. The game was about to change, and for the first time in 20 years, Griselda Blanco wasn't writing the rules. Marcus drove through Miami's twilight streets with Elena's note pressed against his heart, but he wasn't heading home. Instead, he found himself pulling into the parking lot of St. Augustine's Catholic Church, where Father Santos would be finishing evening prayers. The time for running was over. He sat in the empty sanctuary, watching candlelight dance across weathered wooden pews. This place had been his refuge during the darkest months after Elena's death, where Father Santos had helped him understand that grief wasn't something to overcome but to transform. Now he needed that wisdom again, but for a different kind of transformation. Marcus? Father Santos emerged from the vestry, his lined face creased with concern. You look like a man who's seen ghosts. Worse, Marcus said. I've seen the truth. He told the priest everything. Griselda's revelation, Jim's betrayal, the 20-year game of manipulation and murder. Father Santos listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, his weathered hands folded in his lap like a man accustomed to hearing confessions that would break lesser souls. "So you know who killed Elena," Father Santos said when Marcus finished. "And you know why. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? What would you do?" "I would remember that justice and vengeance are not the same thing, though they often wear similar faces." The priest's voice carried the weight of someone who'd counseled cops and criminals alike. One leads to peace, the other to an endless cycle of darkness. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Father Santos the surveillance photos from Griselda's file. The priest's face appeared in several images, unlocking the church, walking to his car, buying groceries. Evidence of how completely they'd all been watched, catalogued, reduced to pieces on Griselda's chessboard. "She's going to use you," Marcus said. "All of you. Maria, Miguel, everyone I care about. She'll turn my love into a weapon against itself, just like she's been doing for 20 years. Then don't give her the chance." Father Santos studied the photographs with surprising calm. "You say she's been studying you, learning your patterns, your weaknesses. But has she learned your strengths?" "What do you mean?" "Elena's letter. Read it to me again." Marcus unfolded the note, his wife's handwriting still clear after 5 years. "For my Marcus, if anything happens to me, know that our love was the realest thing in this broken world. Don't let the darkness win." "She didn't say avenge me," Father Santos observed. "She said don't let the darkness win. There's wisdom in that distinction." Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, Bayfront Park, midnight. "Come alone, and your friends live to see morning. Bring backup, and Miguel's grandson becomes an orphan. G." The priest read the message over Marcus's shoulder. "She's forcing your hand. She's trying to." Marcus stood and pocketed the phone. "But Elena taught me something Griselda never learned." "What's that?" "Love isn't a weakness to be exploited. It's a strength that can't be defeated." Marcus headed for the door, then stopped. "Father, I need you to call Maria and Miguel. Tell them to take their families somewhere safe tonight. Don't tell them why, just that it's important." "And you?" Marcus touched Elena's ring on his finger, feeling its weight like a promise. "I'm going to do something Griselda won't expect. Which is, I'm going to trust her." The priest's eyebrows rose. "That seems unwise." "Not trust her intentions. Trust her obsession." Marcus's voice carried a new certainty, tempered by 20 years of hunting criminals and 5 years of grief. She spent 2 decades orchestrating this confrontation, every detail planned, every variable accounted for. But obsession creates tunnel vision. She's so focused on her grand finale that she can't see the one thing that could destroy it all. And what's that? Marcus smiled for the first time since Elena's death. Not the broken grimace of a man pretending to heal, but the sharp expression of a predator who'd finally found his prey. "The fact that I'm not coming to her game to win it. I'm coming to end it." He walked into the Miami night, Elena's words echoing in his mind like a prayer. Griselda Blanco had spent 20 years studying Marcus Rivera, the broken man, the guilty survivor, the manipulatable target. But she'd never met Marcus Rivera, the widower, who'd found peace with his ghosts and purpose in his pain. The game was about to change, because Marcus wasn't going to Bayfront Park to save his friends or seek revenge for his wife. He was going to do something far more dangerous to an obsessed mind. He was going to offer Griselda exactly what she thought she wanted, and trust that getting it would finally destroy her. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Rivera was hunting again. Marcus arrived at Bayfront Park 20 minutes early, moving through the shadows with the methodical patience that had made him DEA's best hunter. The midnight air carried the salt tang of Biscayne Bay and the distant hum of Miami's sleepless energy. He found Griselda Blanco sitting alone on a bench facing the water, looking like any grandmother enjoying the night breeze. She was smaller than he remembered, time having carved her down to something almost fragile, but her eyes still held the cold calculation that had once made her the most feared woman in the cocaine trade. "You came alone," she said without looking at him. How disappointingly predictable. Marcus sat beside her, close enough that she couldn't miss Elena's wedding ring on his finger. "Did you think I'd bring an army? Risk the people you're threatening? You studied me for 20 years, Griselda. You know exactly who I am." "Yes," she said, finally turning to face him. "A man who chooses others' lives over his own satisfaction. It's been your weakness since the beginning. Maybe. but it's also been my strength." She laughed, the sound bitter as old coffee. "Strength? I've been pulling your strings like a puppet master. Every choice you've made, every moment of guilt you've carried, all of it orchestrated by me. Your wife died because I willed it. Your partner betrayed you because I commanded it. Even your grief has danced to my rhythm." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his service weapon, but instead of pointing it at Griselda, he set it on the bench between them. "Then take it. Finish your masterpiece." She stared at the gun, confusion flickering across her weathered features. "What game are you playing?" "No game. You spent 20 years arranging this moment, proving you could destroy everything I love. Well, you won. Elena's dead. Jim's betrayed me. I'm sitting here broken and alone, exactly as you planned." Marcus leaned back against the bench, his voice carrying a strange peace. "So what now? What comes after revenge?" "Now you suffer," she said, but uncertainty crept into her tone. "Now you live with the knowledge that your weakness killed everyone you cared about." I already lived with that. For 5 years after Elena's death, I carried that guilt like chains. It nearly destroyed me. Marcus touched the ring on his finger. "But then I realized something. Elena didn't die because I was weak. She died because you're small." Griselda's hand moved toward the gun. "Careful, Rivera. You spent 2 decades orchestrating this elaborate revenge because you couldn't accept that a burned-out DEA agent had outmaneuvered the great Griselda Blanco. Your entire legend reduced to a footnote about the one who got away." Marcus's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "All this death, all this manipulation, it was never about justice or power. It was about your wounded pride. I am the cocaine godmother." Her composure cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "I built an empire while you were writing parking tickets. And where is that empire now? Where are your sons? Your legacy?" Marcus gestured toward the glittering Miami skyline. "This city moved on without you. The drug trade evolved beyond your methods. You became irrelevant, so you invented a purpose, destroying me. But what happens when that purpose is complete?" Griselda grabbed the gun, her aged hands trembling slightly. "I kill you. I win. And then what? You go back to your safe house? Count your money? Wait for death in some anonymous bedroom?" Marcus smiled sadly. "You've made me your entire reason for living. Without me to hunt, you're just a lonely old woman who outlived her own relevance." She pressed the barrel against his chest, but tears were streaming down her face. "You don't understand. You can't understand what it cost me to build what I had, what it cost to lose it." "I understand loss," Marcus said quietly. "But I learned something you never did. Love doesn't end with death. Elena's love changed me, made me better, gave my life meaning beyond revenge or ego. That's why you'll never truly destroy me, because the best parts of who I am came from her, and those parts are beyond your reach." Griselda's finger tightened on the trigger. "Pretty words won't save you. I'm not trying to save myself. I'm trying to save you." The unexpected kindness in his voice seemed to shatter something inside her. The gun wavered, then dropped to her lap. "Save me? From what?" "From dying as empty as you've lived these past 20 years. Marcus stood slowly, making no move toward the weapon. "Your obsession with me is the only thing keeping you alive. But obsessions are prisons, Griselda, and I won't be your jailer anymore." He walked away, leaving her alone with the gun and the hollow victory she'd spent 2 decades constructing. Behind him, he heard a sound that might have been sobbing or might have been laughter. Marcus Rivera walked home through Miami's neon-lit streets, Elena's ring catching the streetlight, carrying his wife's love like armor against the darkness. The hunt was finally over.